Thanks, Brenda. So it's really nice to be with all of you up here and all of you out there. Not an easy job to go right after lunch, so I'm just going to acknowledge that for everybody. So yeah, my name's Robin Harkless. I do facilitate a couple of the collaboratives here in Hardin County, and I'm really pretty thrilled to be here with everybody today over the next couple of days. The portion that we're about to enter into is really, we're going to kind of put you all up here on the stage in a fishbowl. My guess is that many of you have had inner dialogues and conversations with each other along the way about some of the questions that we're going to be asking you to really think through and share out. And this is an opportunity for all of us to kind of listen into that dialogue today. I'm guessing from the audience, I'm getting a little bit of feedback here, so sorry about that. I'm guessing that some of you are familiar with some of these collaboratives, and none of you are familiar probably with all of them unless you work for High Desert Partnership or in the county. So I'm going to ask everyone that's up here to actually start by giving us just a little bit of a sort of high-level view of your collaborative, give us a little bit of the backstory. And then we want to invite you to really share with us, kind of your version of the story of the collaborative, speaking to what you've experienced as some of the successes along the way, some of the challenges. And I was just kind of reflecting on a few of the themes that I heard this morning from various presenters and speakers. And part of this is sort of like the invisible, I think Brenda said. I think Laura referred to it as the unexpected. And some of those, I think of it as sort of the art part of this. What are those sort of moments or things that you really didn't plan for, that actually created a spark or an opening or something, even a challenge, a major challenge, that actually contributed to progress of the group or progress of the issue. So I would sort of invite you to think about that, sort of like what were some of those eureka or aha moments for you and your group along the way. And then, of course, any of those, I imagine that there are some of us out there who are also looking for what are some of those kind of common threads that really contribute to a successful collaborative. So we'll be listening for those as well. And I think we have about an hour and 15 minutes. So we've got some time, but we'd like to ask everybody to start off limiting yourself to about 5 to 10 minutes. And that way we'll hopefully have some time for you to dialogue actually with each other. And then after the break, we'll have an opportunity to invite everyone else into the conversation. Sound good? Some of you are awake. That's good. All right. So I'm not going to try to mix it up. I'm just going to start to my left and ask you to introduce yourself, your collaborative, and say a little bit about sort of your version of the story.
Good afternoon. All right. Good afternoon. My name is Bob Salinger. I'm the Conservation Director for Portland Audubon Society, and Dan Nicholas, who's next to me, and I are going to talk about the Harney Basin Wetlands Initiative, which is the collaborative effort that followed the development of the comprehensive plan for Malheur, which was also a collaborative process that the next two speakers will talk about. So we're a little bit out of sync here. We're working backwards in time. So a little bit of quick background. I'm going to start with Audubon and then work into the bigger picture, actually. We're a bird conservation organization, and if you care about birds, you have to care about Malheur National Wildlife Refuge in Harney County. Incredibly important for bird populations. Half the world's population of Ross's geese, one of the most productive waterfowl breeding areas in the country. Incredibly important for shorebird birds. 20% of the world's white-faced ibis population. The list goes on and on. It's an incredibly important place for birds. It's also a place that's fallen on hard times. The lake, which was once one of the most productive waterfowl areas in the country, now is down 90% in terms of production, and that's due to carp, and you'll hear more about that later. The lands around Malheur, you can't separate the lands, Malheur, from the lands that surround it, the private lands. They're all important for birds. And if you're interested in bird conservation, you need to be thinking about the landscape holistically. our history with Malheur goes way, way back. We were founded in 1902 in large part to promote the establishment of Malheur, Klamath, and Three Arch Rock. So our founding coincides with those efforts and has been part of our history. And we've maintained a relationship with the refuge throughout more than 100 years. So we were very excited when we got invited to be part of the CCP process, this idea that we were going to develop a collaborative approach to fixing the problems that we're facing Malheur. Bruce Taylor called me up right after I got the conservation director job and said, you need to be here for this, and I'm still forever indebted to him for that. We were also really intrigued by the idea of doing this collaboratively because these documents do have a typical way they're produced. Agencies go out, they scope, they get comments, they write what they intended to write in the first place, and then they get sued. And we were excited about the possibility of avoiding that approach. And Audubon's a group that collaborates wherever possible. We think that's much more sustainable if you can bring people together and really come to consensus. That's more sustainable than more aggressive methods, but we also use those as well. And we have an example right nearby at Klamath where we are suing over the CCP. We're suing in part because they didn't even do it. Not only was it not collaborative, they just didn't do it at all. And so, we'll use the range of tools, but we want to start with collaboration. So we wound up with a situation where I think despite everybody's concerns, we did come to consensus on the CCP. There was no litigation. There were aha moments. We went in thinking it was going to be grazing. That was going to be the big issue. And it wound up being carp. And when that changed, a lot of the dynamic changed. We also spent a heck of a lot of time together in rooms like this, but also drinking whiskey afterwards, which I think was more important. That's another aha moment. Learning about each other, getting to trust each other, getting to know each other, learning about each other's problems and challenges, and really develop relationships. So when the CCP came to an end, those of you that haven't seen a CCP, this is what it looks like. So it makes a really good doorstop. It looks impressive on your shelves when your board members come in and you can point to and say, I helped work on this. But a lot of times, we get done with these processes, even when we all work together, and they get put on a shelf, and it goes back and becomes an internal document, and the agency may implement part of it, it may not implement any of it, it may collect dust. And we felt at the end of it that there was such strong relationships and such commitment and such faith in this document that we wanted to stay together. And so we formed the Harney Basin Wetlands Initiative, which is basically a group, 20 some odd groups that were participating for multiple years in developing this that wanted to stay together, work together, and help implement the plan. And one of the things we felt was it needed to be bigger than the refuge, both in terms of just having, the refuge was absolutely and remains a major leader, but it needed to be owned by a bigger group of people if we really wanted to be sustainable and effective. We also need to look at a bigger landscape. As I mentioned earlier, if you care about birds, you have to care about the private lands as well, and there's an intersection there. So we formed the Harney Basin Wetlands Initiative under the High Desert Partnership, meet 4 times a year, and the goals are basically, first, to address carp and water quality. In order to address carp in Malheur Lake, you have to address the places that carp come from, and that's the private lands that surround the refuge. So a carp strategy to reduce the amount of carp and restore the habitat for waterfowl. Secondly, flood irrigation. If you go out on Sylvia's floodplain, that's an amazing place to watch birds. That's some of the best bird watching in the county right now is on the Sylvia's floodplain, which is not the refuge, it's private lands. And the threat there is conversion from flood irrigation. That flood irrigation is really important for migrating birds. And so how do we promote flood irrigation and work with landowners to make sure those systems are upgraded, efficient, effective, but also maintain those habitat qualities? And that's sort of a switch for a lot of conservation organizations that tend to focus more on water quality, quantity. In this case, it's promoting some traditional methods that are being phased out. Also to fundraise, we've worked together over the years to create funding mechanisms and got a $6 million grant from OWEB to promote this work, and have worked on other fundraising mechanisms as well. The final piece is really outreach. How do we engage people in this effort and bring in the community, also build relationships beyond the community, get the public involved with this beyond Harney County as well. So just a couple of quick challenges that I'll throw out there and then I'll pass it on to Dan. One is you get a lot of credit for being collaborative, and I think there's always the danger of becoming complacent. collaboration for collaboration's sake. But we always need to keep our eye on what we're trying to do, which is make change on the ground that works for everybody. So really holding ourselves accountable. You've already heard about succession. How do we keep something like this, which is going to be a 10, 20, 30-year effort? How do we make sure we sustain it as people transition and agencies transition? Expanding the circle. It's easy to keep meeting with the same people over and over again and feel like you have this collaborative group, but are we constantly expanding that and bringing more people in and diversifying the participation and getting new insights from beyond our, it can become a situation where you're constantly reinforcing each other. Are we open to the criticisms that go beyond that circle, and are we bringing those people in? Funding is always an issue, and political support. I remain disappointed. After the occupation, we heard a lot about opportunities for really promoting this as a national example, but we have not seen the political community weigh in and make sure this is going to be funded and sustainable, and I think that's important. I look to the congressional delegation to really bolster this kind of thing, because it is so uncommon. And then lastly, I would just come back to change on the ground. Collaboration is great, but if we aren't effective, if we don't make the kind of changes that we've been talking about, we don't do the adaptive management, learn from what we're doing, and really achieve something, it really doesn't mean anything in the end, and people lose confidence in these kinds of things if you don't deliver. So I think that's always keeping those objectives in mind and making sure we're on track for them.
Good job, Bob. I don't have to say a thing now. But Bob did a very good job of summarizing the activities of the collaboration. I guess, again, I just want to point out, to me, what is one of the most important things about collaboration is the people that you get to know. One of the processes in collaboration is the first thing you do is you analyze what issue it is and what the values are of that issue. And it always, the aha moment for me was the fact that basically we want the same thing. We all want clean water, clean air, healthy landscape, diverse wildlife. It's just how we get there that there's a difference of opinion. And over the course of time, and many people that have been involved in the collaborative that take a great deal of their time, drive clear across the state to come to this community, spend their time learning about this community and our issues here and the realities and the wonderful things we have here. Instead of making a snap judgment, these guys have a vested interest, have taken their time to learn, discuss with the people that live here, and that has made all the difference in the success of our collaboratives. Again, it boils down to the people and their involvement and their passion for what they're doing as to what makes a collaborative effective. And to all you guys that we have all worked with over the years, thank you for putting in time. For all the Harney County natives that are here, that there used to be this automatically, no, we aren't even going to talk to them because they're Audubon Society or they're Wetlands Conservancy, they're bad people. Well, we've learned they are bad people and vice versa.
In wetlands, important wetlands in the state, and how to conserve those. And we're a land trust, so we own land, but we also recognize that there's a lot of people all over the state, and especially a lot of rural landowners, ranchers, that actually are a big part of conserving those wetlands. So that was why I was invited to come and participate in this whole group. So I got tasked with starting a subgroup of everything called the Ecology Work Group. And the whole idea was to just begin to collect information to understand a little bit more about these wet meadows. And guess what? These wet meadows, these birds, these cows, it's all about this magical landscape where there's water. And water here is gold. It's amazing, it's the magic here, and sometimes it's here and sometimes it's not. And it changes its mind every year when it's going to be here or not. So the whole thing of these wet meadows, which provide incredible habitat for birds, and it's also a place that provides forage for cows and a livelihood here. They're always changing, and either the species or the people who are managing the lands always have to be changing with the weather. And you don't know, even in February, it rains, and is this the last rain of the year? Or is it going to rain now, and how do you manage that land? So that's what we started doing, is We start doing some work to just look at vegetation in response to water and how it changes over the years. Then we start working with the Ag Research Station to look at reed canary grass invasion, and then also just different tools to manage this landscape of these wet meadows, of how to keep them wet meadows. Grazing is one possibility, haying is another one, raking's another one, burning might be other one. So we were just looking at all these techniques and what's the response to it and how does wildlife. So we got to start working on those things. But then along the way I start thinking, and it was just like the conversation we were having this morning, this is all about ecological, social, and environmental process and economic processes, and they're all processes. And it's very easy for any one of us to even, like, okay, I'm an ecologist, and you look at one problem, like there's one species of bird that you're looking at, but again, it's a whole process of all these things, or the social or whatever. And that we had to start looking this way and across all three of how those work. And that there was a lot of private landowners who were managing these wet meadows. And just like, you know, as the moments go by, none of us in this room are getting younger. So the whole thing about succession planning and what's the next generation and all those kind of things. And then people from the land trust world, just people are like, we should have more easements or buying land. And then just seeing, well, what do landowners out here think about that? So thanks to Gary and Dan, they introduced me to a lot of private landowners. And over the last 6 months, I've gotten to have one-on-one conversations with about 20 different ranchers, just understanding their story, their connection to the land. What do they think is important about these wet meadows? Where do they see the future? And then Dustin and Tony and I have also been talking to all these managers about what are the different management techniques they're using and how does this all add together and how do we move forward going this way. So my aha moments have been, you know, it's not a no-brainer, but everyone loves these wet meadows. And at all these meetings with landowners, when I say to them, so what do you think is important about these wetland meadows? I'll get a list of 25 things. And it's about the wildlife, it's about the aesthetics, it's a story about childhood, or my grandfather did this, or I love looking at this. It's about public health and safety, because wetlands actually filter water. It's about they hold water when there's a lot of, the list goes on. And I'll tell you, in most of these conversations I've had, cows don't even show up, or if they do, on the bottom. And so as I've had these conversations with people, I often, and then some of these group conversations we've been having, I'll smile. Why are you smiling? It's like, well, I come from a world of you have to write grants, or you have to say to government, these are the things that are valuable. And I said, you just gave me the list of what that is. And I said, and I also know that there's some people on the west side of the state, if I told them I was having these conversations with you, they'd say, oh, well, the first things that they have up there are the cows and their money. And so I said, now I get to go back, and I said, it's not generally the people I work with or my organization, but I'll have to say, no, you know, actually that didn't show up there. But why don't you tell me what you would put as your first thing there? So it's been, for me, those aha moments have just really been taking the time and investing the time to just hear people's stories and just learn about how much everyone here cares about this place, and that we're really working with this thing called water, and that just respect of that water, and how do we all respect it, and then how do we come up with creative solutions to live and work with it.
Thanks, Esther. So I don't have anything to add to that, other than I think that just by what you've heard just so far up on the stage, you can see what the real value. I mean, this is what I get so excited about. This is that this is what happens when you do collaboration in the right way. Is that you have people that come from different areas that have made their life, doing different things, and have an interest in a certain thing. When they get involved with something like this, they get to see the other people that are involved with it also, and they become advocates for those other people's interests, and they hear what they're saying, and they're able to understand the directions they're coming from. The CCP, that's what we're supposed to be talking about here, started this whole thing rolling. We had the refuge had to do a comprehensive plan that was to guide the refuge decision making for the next 15 years after it was signed. And so that's what started us down this road, and from that, we used that to develop the High Desert Partnership and the whole concept of working these things out in this way. So, and this is the fruits of it. I never knew Esther before, or Bob, or many of these other people, and to a lot of people's eyes in this area, they come from adversarial organizations that they didn't want anything to do with. They didn't want to have them involved because they knew they just it'd turn into some kind of a battle or a problem. So do a plan without that, without those issues, and we'll get through it. But we actually invited them to be involved in the whole thing right from the beginning, and they gladly became involved, and it turned out well. And so now there's a plan underway, and it's being monitored, and it's being adjusted as needed, and it's we're looking for the next time that we have to do CCP, which is probably coming up sooner than we think. So,
Thank you. My name is Pam Hardy, and I'm with the Western Environmental Law Center, and who I represent on the Harney County Restoration Collaborative, as well as a number of forest collaboratives around the state. So we're moving from the south end of the county up to the north end of the county. So the Western Environmental Law Center is an outfit that has historically been almost entirely about environmental litigation. We're mostly a law firm, and mostly what we do is go to court on behalf of various different environmental groups. So what the heck am I doing here? I want to tell you that story just a little bit to explain a little bit about why WELC invests in doing the work that we do, and why this collaborative work is so important. And that actually starts out up in Grant County, why we actually came here, and that was Susan Jane Brown, who some of you in this room know, litigator for Western Environmental Law Center, had been super effective at shutting down a lot of the timber sales off the Malheur National Forest. And somebody in Grant County finally called her up one day and said, any chance we can work this out some other way besides in court? And she said, I don't know, let's talk. And so they got together and they started talking. And the answer was, wow, yeah, we can actually work things out some other way. And not only that, but the other way that we work things out, when we sit down and actually start talking about it, we actually come up with better results. Huh, that's very interesting. And so Susan Jane started getting more and more involved in the collaborative up there. At the same time, Oregon Wild was very involved in several of these Eastern Oregon collaboratives. Tim Lilleboe, I just have to say his name here because he was so instrumental in getting so many of the forest collaboratives working in Eastern Oregon, from Oregon Wild. And I took his job on a handful of the collaboratives, Harney County being one of them, Blue Mountains being another one. So essentially what WELC started to see, and then I at some point switched over to WELC, essentially doing the same thing, just for a different outfit. And essentially what WELC started to see was, we as a litigation outfit primarily have had giant impacts on a lot of communities. Because as a result of some of our court cases, things have changed in some places. And that was creating a lot of antagonism. That was creating a lot of hardship. That was creating a lot of people who were having a hard time doing what they had historically done, making sure their kids were fed. And that was creating a lot of pushback in state and federal policy. And then at the same time, so we saw that that was one of the effects of the things we were doing. At the same time, we also saw Susan Jane being involved in the Blue Mountain Forest Partners and getting really good results. Getting community buy-in, getting the logging company back up and running, making sure the mill didn't close, making sure the forest was actually better taken care of, that the thinning was happening when it was supposed to, and so on and so forth. Or like, maybe this is something that we should be investing in more. And so that is now my role in these collaborative situations and forest collaboratives throughout the state, is to say, hey, I think there's a better way of going about this, and that is actually talking to everybody in the community and seeing if we can't find that sweet spot where there is community buy-in, particularly because of the kind of forest issues that we're dealing with at the Harney County Restoration Collaborative. There is, if you look at the science, it turns out there is actually a really big overlap between places where you can actually get better ecological outcomes, which is, the people who donate to Western Environmental Law Center, they do that because they want me out there making sure there are better ecological outcomes. That's what I'm there for. But you can get better ecological outcomes, and you can get better social and economic outcomes if you work together than you could if you just, each person doing their own thing independently and working at odds with each other. And so it's almost time for me to shut up. I'm going to tell one quick story about an aha moment that also has to do with succession, because it's one of the questions, how do you deal with turnover? And it was only about 3-4 years ago that I was brand new, and it was one of my very first collaborative meetings where I had an aha moment, and it was about succession. And I didn't really know what I was doing. I had just been hired by Oregon Wild. I didn't really know. I was up in the north part of the Mount Hero National Forest, and it was my very first field trip. We were going out to look at a salvage sale, and essentially what had happened, which sort of bugged me personally, was that they had gone in and they just, on the statement that this was about safety, they had gone in and just taken the largest trees out of the road areas. Well, if it's about safety, a 12-inch tree is going to squash a person just as much as a 24-inch tree. And so it seemed to me like it was not really accurate, and I was sitting there looking at this and struggling with what to say, and but it was my very first collaborative, and I wasn't very articulate, and I didn't know what was, how to put it. And the guy who was there from the mill saw me struggling, and he said, let me say what Tim would have said. And he just laid out the argument for why the sale had not been done and not been executed very well in the most brilliantly articulate fashion. And I don't even remember exactly what he said, but I remember the feeling. And it just landed in me, it just landed in my heart with this way like, oh, we are playing a totally different game than what I thought. And I realized that this is a group of people that really, really listens to each other. That he is technically, he's the guy on the other side, and he knows my argument better than I do. Okay, this is what it means, and that's when I got it, and that was how succession worked in that particular situation. That's how that collaborative passed on. How do you participate in this culture here? And what we're doing in the Harney County Restoration Collaborative is we're building that kind of trust. And somebody said a beautiful thing earlier, progress will move at the speed of trust. In the forest world, we talk a lot about increasing the pace and scale of forest restoration. And I think one of the most important things that we can do to increase that pace and scale is increase the pace and scale of trust. And that's what this whole meeting is about.
So I'm Jim Campbell with Harney County Restoration Collaborative, and this collaborative has been around, I think, since 2007, when we had a big fire here. And I believe the reason was because the forest was successfully being sued and stopped in most of their timber activities. So the forest supervisor said there had to be a better way, and he enabled this group to start. And so I'm going to digress a little bit here about collaboration. My experience with collaboration to that point was I was a national vice president for the National Federation of Federal Employees. And so I represented about 6,000 bargaining unit people, and under the Clinton administration, he set up this mandatory way for labor and management to resolve their conflicts. And they were to work collaboratively. So the Forest Service developed or used an interest-based bargaining process for collaboration. And it's not anything like what I'm experiencing with this group, but it was very structured, and it got you off of positions, and you talked about issues and interests. And so I soon learned that once you got off your position horse, you could come to consensus, because like resource management, you soon learn that you're arguing over the tools and not the outcome. And so in my role, I was also responsible for ensuring, or at least encouraging, that each national forest in Region 6 had an opportunity to set up their own collaborative outfit. That was a struggle, and because people couldn't get off their damn positions, there had been such bad blood that the people you have in place were not going to come around. And so they failed, and they remained at loggerheads, and they solved disputes by throwing paper at one another, either in the legal process or in the court process. So that was my introduction and appreciation for how collaboration can work, even though it's a different process. So back to the this collaborative. I was on this station at this ranger district at that time when this started, and I think it was probably their second or third meeting. So, I still tried to keep one toe in resource management. So I showed up at one of these collaboration meetings, and gosh, there was probably like 35 people there, and there didn't seem to be any structure, what I was used to anyway. And there was still a lot of positional rhetoric going on, so I don't even think I showed up for the second half of the day. I said, this is just not for me. These people are never going to make this work because they're still stuck in positions and not solving problems. So the clock runs, and I retire, and local community group got all up in arms about road management, and I cut firewood, so roads are important to me. So I showed up at some of their meetings, and one of the outcomes of that was, well, if you want to be involved with road management, maybe you should go to these collaboration meetings where they work this stuff out. So I said, oh God, here we go again, So I showed up at a collaboration meeting in 2015, and it was a different horse. Jack was leading a pretty, I won't call it tight ship, but they were off their positions, and they were talking to one another about issues and science, and gosh, how can we work together on this? And I thought, man. So I got over the road thing. They'd already pretty well got that worked out, and I just stayed on with the outfit because they do good work. And they do it the right way, and they get a lot more done than throwing paper at one another and using the legal process. We have had some challenges, and interestingly enough, it was about roads again. And the roads are an issue from the southern end of the Blues all the way to the north. And we had some folks come down from John Mayer Baker, and they were all fired up. And they came to the collaborative, and they were going to do the positional thing. And we were like a bunch of water buffaloes. We kind of got all our butts together and faced out and told these people, so what part of road management don't you understand? We've gone over every single inch of road the Forest Service has proposed to open or close or seasonally adjust, and got kind of quiet. It's like, damn, can't stir up this pot. They've already got it worked out. So they didn't last. They made a meeting or two and took off. So I liked about that group. We got the water buffalo mentality when some outfit is messing with our process and messing with our outcomes. We know kind of politely how to show them the door. And I think that's a secret of this group is there's the trust thing. Had there still been me or other people who were all fired up about roads, we might have shifted on the other cheek and said, yeah, let's go after this. But no, and we're working it out and we're staying with it.
Jeff and I are going to talk about the Wildfire Collaborative, but Jeff was there from the beginning. I came in the middle, so.
So that's not exactly how I remember it. Bruce said, you talk about the boring stuff and I'll talk about what I want to talk about. So I got the boring stuff, and I'll start with how we got there. First thing, Bob, is I want to say that we also called Bruce and said you have to be here. So we'll talk about how the conversations went, probably about the same way. So I'm Jeff Rose, I'm with the Burns District BLM, and our issue is fire, mainly in the rangelands that we've been working on for a little while now. The issue of fire is not a new thing, and it's becoming more and more kind of a common topic. If you paid attention, there's a big fire in the news today in northern Arizona. They evacuated 1,300 people, and it was only 5% contained. And these fires that we're experiencing over the last 15 to 20 years appear to be getting bigger and becoming harder to control. And we had, in 2012, we had a series of fires that burned a lot of ground, over 1 million acres in southeast Oregon, between Harney County and Malheur County. And they had a tremendous impact on not only the ecology of the system, but the other two legs of the stool, of the three legs, is the social and the economic part. And sometime, I think Dan in 2013 or late 2012, Dan came to me and said, hey, we need to do something about this. And I may or may not have been a little resistant at the time, because I'm with the BLM, I know how to fight fire. And it's part of this trust thing that we talked about a little bit, is doing it. But so we started talking a little bit more after my initial reaction and about what do we need to do. And it came down to well, basically the results aren't acceptable post-fire, what we're having. And how do we get ahead of this? Is we're doing the same thing over and over again, trying to improve the situation, and nothing's changing, or it appears not to be changing. And so when Dan came again, because in 2014 we had another series of big fires, is we started moving a little more seriously. We started bringing some people together to talk. And I think this morning somebody mentioned that you get a core group together to try to find the people that need to belong. And that's what we spent some time doing that thoughtfully. Who needs to be in the room to talk about this? And we finally got the group together, and in our group it's a selection of people from the suppression area of how we do things, and it's also a set of folks that are interested in the ecology, and then there's some folks who are working ranches and working on the landscape here, and we all came and sat together and talked about the issue to see what we can come up with. And when I first entered into it, I kind of had the feeling that if I could only explain to everybody in the room what I knew, they would agree with me. If they just hear it from me. And as I progressed in the group, everybody laughs, right? But as I progressed through it, that's not the power. The power is me understanding what they're saying. And it doesn't mean we have to agree on what that topic is or what that result is, but it's understanding what that position is and those values are coming down. So we looked at the wildfire situation and we chunked up it into pieces, and we tackled suppression first. And how do we improve our suppression resources? And in Harney County, we have 6 rangeland fire protection associations, which are basically volunteer organizations that are out there that gain capacity for us to solve the issue. And at that time, we were I think working around each other, Jerry. That would be the best way to look at it, as opposed to working with each other. And through the collaborative, we built some of this trust to where we work together very effectively now, and to the point where on any fire I could expect to hear somebody from an RFPA talking on the radio or attacking the fire embedded with our folks. And that was one of the goals, is to have that seamlessly. It builds that capacity to help us be there. The next kind of part of it, we moved into some other things, trying to look at the prevention end. And in our world, prevention is not the classic Smokey Bear prevention. It's more of a, how do we keep the fires from getting large? And we're still working, we're still talking about that. We're trying some projects to possibly tackle that and work with that. But I think through the group, we've learned to come down to that, what would Dan say? Or what would Bruce say if they're not in the group? And that was, I think, a really important message, is to be able to have that knowledge and that ability to at least get in the neighborhood. You don't have to be right on, but you have to at least acknowledge that maybe somebody else has a different point of view, and that it's important to consider that when you're making choices. The good part about being in the middle is that you kind of make notes, but everything hasn't been said yet. So I think I'll just kind of leave it there for right now, and let Bruce kind of move us along.
Thank you, Jeff. My name is Bruce Taylor. I work for the Intermountain West Joint Venture, which is a regional bird habitat conservation partnership. And the reason I am here, there's a part of me wants to say I'm a serial collaborator, but the truth is these things never end, so it's not really serial. You just keep adding them on, one after the other, I guess. So I missed out on the early part of this, the suppression side of the discussion, which I have actually very little interest and no expertise in. But coming in after the fact and seeing the success they had, I kind of wish I'd been there and I could be basking in the glory of their great achievements. Because, as I understand it, it used to be relations between BLM and the RFPAs were chilly at best, I guess. And now they act like, oh, hey, this is easy. We work together. This is great. And they talk about all the success they had during the last fire season out there. And I'm thinking, oh, geez, the side of the equation that we are now working on, the part that I have joined for the involvement, what do you do to prevent those fires from getting big, to really prevent those mega fires, turns out to be really complicated. And that's probably one of the ahas there is, well, of course there's a reason why they get really big. Yeah, of course, they're difficult. But the answers, and here again, that's one of the beauties of the collaborative process. We all come into these things having some preconceived notions. Jeff thought if everybody just listened to him, that would solve the problem. We all come in with these preconceived notions, and the more you learn about it, the more it becomes apparent it's not that simple. And the great beauty of that shared learning process, which has been the case with all these collaboratives that I've had an involvement in, usually we go in and you end up doing a lot of learning together, which puts you in a position where you can start to answer on behalf of other people who aren't there because you've learned the same things they have. And what we learned is, yeah, it's not as simple as, oh, just put a fire break out there, mow down the sagebrush, or put more cows out there. It turns out to be complicated. And in our case, we took on for our first pilot project, let's do a pilot project, show how we can reduce the risk of these mega fires. And so we confidently picked the most important, largest block of intact sagebrush habitat at highest risk of burning on the Burns District. The best of the best, right? And of course it turned out to be not as simple as we thought. In fact, somebody yesterday, I can't remember, said, we picked the worst of the best places to work. Because it turned out it's almost all wilderness study areas where latitude to do creative things is really limited. I think, and I hope I'm not alone in this, I think we've done some great stuff. It's not huge scale kinds of things, but being able to figure out, we've tackled some of the most difficult challenges. So what do you do when you've got a road, a narrow little road with wilderness study areas on both sides, and the restrictions are more restrictive than if it was a designated wilderness? What can you do? And we've worked out some options there to try to stop a fire that would be heading towards the Pueblos from the southwest, the direction that they come. We will see if we are able to implement that, if BLM is able to implement that. Just yesterday we were talking about one that came out early on, an option of putting a camera up on top of Beatty's Butte. Oregon Natural Desert Association owns the top of Beatty's Butte. Dan Marsh said, we can put a camera up there. And we heard from the technology people yesterday, this is pretty miraculous kind of stuff that they can do, but they have a network of cameras going out there. There's going to be able to see in most of those nooks and crannies, and anybody, including all of you here in the audience, if you really want to sit there and stare at cameras all day, you too could be the first one to call Jeff and say, hey, you got a fire. It's headed toward the Pueblos. No, you still have to pick up the phone, I think. But we are beginning to put into place some things out there that I think do hold promise. Some of the other challenges here, and this shouldn't have been an aha, it should have been obvious. It's really hard to know, are you being successful? Hey, we didn't have a big fire down there last year. Do we get credit for that? No, it's a 1 in 100 years kind of thing. You never know which year it is. And so if we put in place all these things and a fire blows through there and doesn't stop, was it our fault? We didn't do it right? Well, no, from what I understand, when you got, really low humidity and really high winds, there's not a lot you can do other than get out of the way. But we are forced to come back to, so what are we going to do? Do nothing? And Chad Carr just keeps reminding us of this. The Department of Interior, somebody just put out this great science review of all the things around fuel breaks. And you read through it and you start out really optimistically, and by the time you get to the end, you realize, no, none of these things are guaranteed to work, and they all come with negative impacts. And they too felt compelled to say at the end, but if you don't do nothing, it's going to be way worse. So we are still in the midst of our learning process, I would say. And to their credit, people like Jerry, the RFPAs, who keep coming to these meetings, they're part of the equation. There are immediate problems, there are relationship issues. That's fixed. But they're still coming to the table and sitting there and wrestling with us with all those other issues, which I think speaks to the power of the collective, collaborative will there.
Yes, I'm up. How are we doing on time? Are you sure?
What is that?
Okay. Oh, seriously. Man, when you get people talking about something they're passionate about, that's pretty impressive. You're able to stay within that time. So, again, I'm Dustin Johnson. I work for Oregon State University. Out of the Eastern Oregon Ag Research Center. I primarily do extension work, focused on livestock and rangeland type issues. Much of that's county-based. I've also recently taken on some statewide responsibilities in that too. I'm going to be presenting up here with Andrew Shields, and Andrew introduced himself earlier, but as a reminder, Andrew's a wildlife biologist with Roaring Springs Ranch. And Andrew and I, and many other people in this room, worked on an effort to assemble a 30-year conservation agreement for sage grouse in Oregon. And so before we get into describing kind of what that process was and what that looked like, I thought I'd just give a little bit of a brief history in terms of kind of what motivated the effort and why we worked on it. And my history lesson is going to start in 2010. This is an ESA issue, an Endangered Species Act issue. Obviously, the Endangered Species Act extends well in the past beyond that. And we actually, in our effort, dealt with some of those issues, particularly when we started. But in 2010, the Fish and Wildlife Service determined that sage grouse were warranted for being afforded protections under the Endangered Species Act, as these are either being threatened or endangered. But a decision to actually list sage grouse at that time was precluded by a host of other higher priority species that were more imperiled than sage grouse at that time. And so essentially what that did is it made sage grouse an official candidate species for listing. Am I too loud? Do I need to hold this? Okay, it sounds really loud to me, but so in 2010, what's that?
You are louder than Bruce.
Okay. So sage grouse 2010 were an official candidate species for listing. Shortly thereafter, the Fish and Wildlife Service announced a final date for a listing decision, which was September of 2015, right? And so essentially what that did is it gave the Fish and Wildlife Service and its land management and conservation partners a little less than 5 years to put enough conservation and protections in place for sage grouse to avoid a listing decision. Nobody wanted to list sage grouse. And it's a huge issue, and it took in 11 western states. Would have been a real test for the Endangered Species Act. So about that time, I got together with some extension colleagues, and we saw it as an opportunity to develop an extension program. Sort of focused on incorporating sage grouse and sage grouse habitat considerations into land management and monitoring activities. So we developed this extension program and we delivered it in Eastern Oregon. One of the spots that we did it was in Burns, of course, that's where I'm located. Now I won't get into the gory details of how that extension meeting went, but what I will say is that the landowners that came to that meeting made it pretty abundantly clear that they weren't interested in talking about what we had planned to talk about, but instead were much more interested in talking about how a potential listing decision might impact their ranching operations, and probably more importantly, they were interested in talking about what tools were available to them to help protect their ranching operations. And so one of the primary tools that is available for a candidate species is what's called a Candidate Conservation Agreement with Assurances. We affectionately call it the CCAA. And so a CCAA is a conservation agreement between the Fish and Wildlife Service and a landowner or a group of landowners in which the landowners agree to either reduce or eliminate threats on their properties to the species. And in return, the Fish and Wildlife Service provides assurances, that's the assurances part, that those landowners won't be held to a higher standard if the species becomes listed in the future. And so that was one of the primary tools that was available at that time to do what the landowners were asking for at that meeting. So that core group of landowners, with the addition of a pretty large diversity of other partners, NGOs, agencies, kind of the normal suspects there, decided to pursue an agreement. So we officially organized as a steering committee for that effort in August of 2011, and then we met monthly in the basement meeting room of the Harney County Courthouse. You ever been there? No windows. So we kind of got locked in there on a monthly basis, working on this agreement. And so that effort took nearly 3 years, 33 months, a little over 1,000 days. And that leads me to talk about one of the challenges. So when Andrew and I talked briefly, like 2 minutes, about what we were going to do up here, he said, I think you're most qualified to talk about the challenges. And I wasn't sure how to take that, actually. I don't know if that means I'm challenged or challenging or whatever, but I'm going to talk about the challenges. So one of the challenges is that this stuff takes time. It takes a lot of time, and particularly in the beginning, you're primarily, as many have mentioned up here, working on establishing that trust. And in my experience in participating in many of these collaboratives, is that's bare minimum 1 to 2 years. Just to establish that trust so you then can make progress. But you're having to balance that with the need to keep people coming back to the table. So you have to show progress in order to do that. So it becomes this delicate balancing act between taking the necessary time and showing progress. The other challenge I'll briefly mention is related to how much time we were given to present up here, which was 10 minutes. Trying to tell a story about a 3-year process in 10 minutes is really tough. And so that relates to, I think, a challenge that many of us have up here, and that is, how do you best tell that story? I mean, we have a story to tell, we have a process that we can export to other areas, but it's really challenging. We have communications folks that are helping us with that, but I'm a scientist. I don't know how to do that stuff very well. So that's the other challenge I'd mention, is telling that story. And Andrew's going to continue to tell the story.
Thank you. As Dustin said, I'm Andrew Shields, and I came in to the CCAA development process partway through. I wasn't there in kind of the initial stages, and really it was my first opportunity to participate in a collaborative process. I'm not a serial collaborator like Bruce is, but I'm getting there. Anyway, things that we've talked about today, but things that I want to highlight from my perspective that made it successful. The first was relationships, and Dustin kind of alluded to that, but getting to know all the different people in the room, and then the trust. You know, I learned Angela, that represents the Fish and Wildlife Service from Bend. She is from here. She grew up here. You know, she's a local, more local than me or many other people in the room. And Jay Kirby, who represents the Nature Conservancy, he was raised on a ranch in this area and went to Crane High School, and you know, and so I think getting to know these people around the table and trusting them and realizing that we all care deeply about the land and about this area, and I think that helps move the process forward. We can kind of realize that we're all on the same page in many of those aspects. Another point from my perspective is that we were listened to, and I think a lot of processes out there, they solicit input and they solicit comments, but at least in my limited experience, it's tough for me to kind of follow my input through to the final product and see where I may have influenced it. And that wasn't the case in this process. We sat around the table and someone came up with an idea, and the attitude wasn't, no, that won't work. The attitude was, let's see how we can make that work, and let's see how we can make that fit into the plan and into the document. And that for me anyway, it kept me and it kept us engaged, where ideas brought forward, and now I can look through that plan. It's, I don't know, 30 or 40 or 50 pages, and I can point to specific paragraphs and say, this is something that somebody suggested, and we needed to wordsmith it a little, and Angela had to take it back to the solicitors and make sure the solicitors were okay with what we said, and usually it was, sometimes it wasn't, but the engagement there. And then I'll speak to one challenge that I've been a part of going forward, and it was mentioned earlier today, and that is the implementation. We spent over 1,000 days developing this awesome plan that was bulletproof and was going to last for 30 years. And then we took it and started implementing the monitoring and implementing the different things, parts of the plan, and there's questions that come up, and there again, the people on the ground, maybe it should be done this way. Well, maybe we need a different perspective to make sure that we have buy-in from the group. And so you know, as we have worked through the implementation, we've reconvened groups and part of the steering committee and the whole steering committee for different things, and kind of tried to keep that that group buy-in and that group together to where, you know, the plan will work long term and will continue to be a good thing on the ground. And so that's, you know, a couple successes from my perspective. I think it's part of it. Maybe, you know, Chris brought up the point earlier today, asked the question about the role of crisis or crises in these, and ours maybe was a little more born out of crisis. We had a 2015 listing decision, and you know, maybe everyone wouldn't have been at the table if that wasn't the case, but everyone was there, and I think it was a successful process.
Mark Owens, Harney County Commissioner, farmer on the weekends, I've learned. So Andrew and Dustin, I'm a little jealous that they had 2 minutes to decide who was going to talk about what. I guess I should have read those last 5 emails from Brenda about the collaborative summit. And maybe Pat and I could have had more than 15 seconds by me asking, what do you want me to speak about? So she said, speak about how it started. So I'll tell you how it started. It's community-based planning or place-based planning. Everybody in Harney County knows we live in a water shortage or water critical environment. As Esther was saying, water's gold. The Sylvia's tributary, 385,000 acre feet adjudicated in 1906. Average flow, 220,000 acre feet. There's winners and losers almost every year. Last year there was a lot of winners. This year will be a lot of perceived losers. Groundwater, we're in a groundwater heyday. We're putting in pivots, economic growth is going up. We're sailing along fine. There's a few areas that people are having a little bit of concern, but it's just Jerry. It'll be okay. Then in 2015, Oregon Water Resource Department came in and said, hey, wait, maybe there's winners and losers here. And they came to our community and said, we might have wrote a check that Mother Nature can't cash. And a 1972 study says you might be over-allocated. You might not be at a sustainable level. Well, that wasn't good news. What are you going to do about it? Looking at the department. We're going to stop processing any new permits. So basically, shutting down the basin. So when people think the basin's been shut down, there's one thing I want to point out. Of those permits that have been given out, only 70% of them have actually been developed in 2015. 30% still have the legal right to be developed. The water budget that the Oregon Water Resource Department presented to us in 2015 from a 1972 study said there's 260,000 acre feet of recharge that possibly comes into the Harney Basin. So the Sylvia's, Silver Creek, and Donner Woodson. 89,000 acre feet of that goes to springs and streams, leaving a remainder of approximately 170,000 acre feet for all other uses. Currently online, we believe there's 189,000 acre feet of water being pumped out. We've permitted 260,000 acre feet. Uh-oh. So what are we going to do? We're going to team up with USGS and we're going to go into a groundwater study. We can convene a RAC and try to deal with situations for the 39 pending applications. So as I'm working in the regulatory fashion, which I sometimes focus on too much, there's a group of people out there that I really haven't met or don't know yet that are trying to figure out how we're going to work through to understand the problem and solution. Brenda, Dustin, some members of the audience, the Watershed Council. So they applied for a grant for Oregon Water Resource to do place-based planning. Place-based planning has some sideboards, has some potential, but what opportunity does it have for our community? Our community can come together with a water plan to try to take control of our water future. We can't change water law, we can't change prior appropriation. But we can come up with a whole lot of tools and opportunities to increase water availability, to try to maintain agriculture, while we look at ecological, while we benefit, hopefully, Harney Basin Wetland Initiative, and basically take charge of our destiny. is the Water Resource Department has limited tools. And they'd much rather work with us on a volunteer agreement or volunteer plan in order for us to have that opportunity. Pat will talk about some of, I'm not sure what Pat's going to talk about. She told me what to talk about. But an aha moment. So first collaborative I've been involved in, all right, first step, build an inclusive collaborative, build stakeholders. Got this. All right, community, no problem, they'll show up. We need Water Watch, we need TNC, we need this, we need that. So we went down, sat down with Water Watch, invited them, come in. Great, we're cruising along fine. We've built that collaborative going through the first year. I mean, of course, all the community's on board. We all have a shared understanding. I mean, as Dustin says, I can jump to solutions immediately. Then I'm talking to this young lady at heart that might have white hair, and we're talking about a domestic well and an agricultural well, and I really don't forget the whole conversation, but she says to me, "Mark, they fear you." I said, "What do you mean?" She says, "You have some leadership, you're in agriculture, they don't think you have concern about their issue or their problem." I was into this collaborative a year before one of our local people told me that. So it taught me to slow down, it taught me to listen, it taught me to build some of those relationships that I thought I had because we were a community, which I didn't have. And I'm beginning to really respect her. Sometimes I don't know where she comes from, but it's good. But I think we're all, just in the early part of this collaborative, starting to build those relationships that have been successful for these. And we're building those relationships with our community members that actually live here, that we actually need to understand how we have that water feature together.
It's going to turn out perfect, Mark. It's better that we didn't talk about this. I'm going to speak more generally about the collaborative process, and I think as you've heard the stories up here, we are among the newer collaboratives. We've been in place for about a year and a half, and we are, however, among the most important to the sustainability of our community, of our county. Because we're talking about water. And the collaborative, as you've heard over and over again, gives stakeholders the opportunity to have input into solutions. And as a community member, not an irrigator, but as a community member, as a landowner, having input into solutions that I think are going to be the best solutions that we can come up with for our community is the most important thing. I don't want other people making decisions about my community that I don't have input in. And that's what the collaborative process gives us. It invites everyone to the table. Early on, I heard a lot of talk in my community that, oh yeah, another collaborative. Yeah, you guys will spin your wheels, and the solution is already predetermined. Don't know why you're wasting your time. I guess I'm here to say to those people that there are a heck of a lot of people who are working really, really, really hard to come up with solutions that fit the needs of our community. I can't overstate that. Being a part of a collaborative is hard work. You don't get to just show up at the meetings once a month or once every 2 months or twice a month, whatever the schedule is. The meetings seem to increase as we go on. But what I'm trying to say is that you do come to the meetings and you talk about ideas, and we don't always agree. But the important thing is that you don't get to go home and just forget about it. There's work to be done, there's research to be done, there's experts to be talked to, there's other brains to pick, people who have had the same experiences that we've had. We don't have to reinvent the wheel in in all of these cases. There are other people in our state and around the country that have had similar experiences. And so we spend a lot of time when we're not meeting, gathering information about those people and the kinds of solutions that they arrived at that may fit our needs. And so, again, being part of a collaborative is hard work. The other piece is just from sitting kind of vicariously and watching the process of the CCAA collaborative, it's really important to maintain people's focus on this process that can go on for 3 or 4 years. When you've been doing something for that long, it's easy sometimes to lose your passion. And so I think you can talk about a collaborative process framework, which is what our facilitators help us with. But then there's also the emotional piece of the collaborative, where at the beginning of it, everyone is gung-ho, everyone comes together, and everyone has their agenda. And slowly, but it does happen, people start falling off. And that enthusiasm starts to wane because they're not seeing immediate results. And so that part is really hard. And it is kind of an emotional roller coaster at that stage of the game. And the stayers are the ones that are still in the room and come back every month to those meetings looking for solutions. What we know is that we do need a comprehensive plan for our community, but it has to be something that our entire community can gather around. It's not something that we can create in isolation and then say, here guys, we've done the work for you. Let's sign on the dotted line. We have got to engage the community in the process, and we've got to come up with a solution that is that meets the needs of everyone. Mark talked about the fact that, one of his aha moments was realizing that some people felt excluded, some of those issues. One of the things we've done on our collaborative is divide into work groups. I'm going to refer back to Dan's reference to the three-legged stool. All of these kind of focus around the social, the economic, and the ecological. So we have the agricultural work group, we have the ecological work group, we have the vegetation work group, and we have the domestic water work group. What we realized, and what Mark alluded to, is that sometimes we felt like we were working in isolation, and we wanted to make sure that we had the mechanism where it was all going to come together at our collaborative meetings. And so having that awareness for us was really important. Some of the aha moments that I had was that collaborative work is expensive if we do it right. We've had to go out and get grants to continue our community-based water. We had good funding from Oregon Water Resources that I'm guessing they went through in the first 6 months. But we went out and looked for funding to continue the process for all of those things that keep the group together and keep them moving, and for the expertise in water that we need. Another aha moment was something that one of our presenters said. Innovative solutions often do not fit existing law. Be prepared to seek clarity in existing statutes, or develop your own pilot. I think one of the limiting factors is that Oregon Water Resources doesn't have the flexibility sometimes that we might have as a community. And it's our job as community members to come up with a solution that we think best meets our own needs. And that's what the collaborative process does for us.
Okay, well, I think by this point everything has truly been said, so I'll pass it off to Dan. Hi, everybody. I'm Dave Robinson. I'm the principal at the middle school, and it's just been a real privilege of mine to be involved in the project that was formerly known as the Positive Youth Initiative and later became YCTC Youth Changing the Community. And I understand from how it started that there was at least 100 cups of coffee poured out just to talk to community members and just really find out, what's going well with the youth in our community, what are some areas that we can improve on, and how can we work together to really target our youth and give them opportunity for success. So you still owe me a cup of coffee, okay? The first meeting was just really amazing to me. I couldn't believe it. There was over 60 people from all these different organizations that supported youth in one way or another, and I was just amazed at their sincerity and their willingness to contribute and want to help. And we were so well facilitated. This whole way we've been so well facilitated by Peter and Robin and others, and it's just been a real joy to have that happen with them. But everybody came together, we brainstormed like crazy, we had lots of fantastic discussions, and it was all captured really nicely and by facilitators, plotted out, recorded for us, as well as brainstorming next steps and moving forward. So the structure that you guys have provided and the safe place and cataloging of all the information has just been incredible. I appreciate it so much. So great first step, a lot of enthusiasm, we're rocking along. In subsequent meetings, we developed goals. We really wanted to make sure we stayed focused. We did things like safe places, effective education, access to opportunities, caring adults for mentors and role models, healthy beginnings for our youngest members of the community, and opportunities to help others. After we really established goals and a mission statement that worked really well for us, we brainstormed individual activities and we compared them to those goals. Do they really meet exactly what we want to do? And we looked at those activities and then brainstormed and highlighted and prioritized the ones that we really wanted to work on. We early on got the youth involved, and that was a hot aha for us, I think, when all of a sudden we brought a bunch of kids in, and it was awesome to hear their voice and their enthusiasm. And they just took off. We had no idea what was going to happen. They were gung-ho. They wanted an activity right now, and they were going to go for it. And we said, okay. And Becky Graham managed to corral that group and keep them going on track. It was awesome. But they really changed. They first of all changed the whole name. They changed our initiative to YCTC, and it was like, okay, well, there you go. They really got excited about the skateboard park, a really visible, obvious place that some real change could be made. And they started fundraising, they started meeting regularly, they just did a great job. And then 2 weeks ago, the consultant from the skateboard company showed up, and we all sat around the skateboard park and dreamed and imagined and looked at different ways that we could do that. So it really worked, it really happened. They were off and rolling. So after that, we looked at our other activities and what became really important, and it really bubbled up to the surface that there were several committees and several organizations in the community that were all working towards the same thing but hadn't been talking to each other. So we got those together, we got representatives from those different places, a few of us from the project, and we created a committee around career-connected learning, with the whole idea that starting at a young age, we're going to really work with kids and help them understand what kinds of careers are available to them in the pre-K to 5th grade area. We're going to explore those different careers that we have at the middle school. And then at the high school, we're going to have career training and education with internships and mentoring programs that people could be involved with. And that became our pilot project to start with. We developed a thorough plan, and we presented it to the school board where it was well received. And we're moving forward now with pursuing grants for a community school liaison person that will be able to go back and forth between all of the different public agencies and businesses and nonprofits in the region and the community to work with our high school kids directly and support them in their career learning. So it's just amazing. One of our challenges, I think, is that we don't want to be single issue or one or two issues organizations. We really just have laid a foundation where relationships have really been developed. We've got consistent goals that everybody's bought in on. We've got lists of activities for the future to be able to work towards, and those are prioritized. And we've created a framework in place that will really help support youth success in the community. So this career-connected learning, the skateboard park are just a couple examples of the things that we hope to come.
So being here today, I kind of feel like a carp out of water. Not only does our collaborative have nothing to do with natural resources, we have no natural adversaries. But it's been fascinating just being here today to see how that same model that works for all these natural resources also works for social issues. Because we have an at-risk population in the youth. And while there's sage grouse that are at risk, there's water that's at risk, we also have youth in our community who are at risk. And so being able to use that collaborative model towards them and help them has been just an awesome experience. I'm the administrator for the hospital here in town, and we have about 200 employees. And what we see very clearly, and I see Denise Rose in the back. Denise was a recruiter for the hospital for a long time. And there's a night and day difference between recruiting somebody from outside of the community with no ties versus those that have ties to our community. Kids that grew up here, that later go off to school and come back and work at the hospital, they want to be here for the rest of their careers. And they're vested in the community, they're vested in doing good work. Those that come from the outside can acquire that and become the same kind of employees, but it's a little more challenging for them because they don't have the tie, they don't have the same passion for the community that somebody that grows up here. So the work that's being done by this collaborative to help engage those youth that are at risk in our community to have the experiences that will help them be productive adults, but then also to gain some experiences with us as a hospital, with the other businesses in town, which hopefully will lead them back here to Harney County years down the road after they've had an opportunity to go out, get education, do other things, and then come back and be part of it. So it's a great experience, a great opportunity to be part of it.
Well, thank you all. I don't think there's much I can say other than just to, there's a felt sense here of you all sort of drop down into your hearts around this topic of collaboration and your experience. And one of the things that I just want to kind of observe that, humility seems to show up a lot in this conversation around how you move through a successful collaborative. And many of you actually shared a bit of a story around how humility sort of played into either kind of moving past impasse or as an entry point for trust. And trust was the other thing that really kind of came through, I think, in a lot of this conversation today. So I think we're going to take a break. We're about out of time, but we're going to come back and have another hour of your time, hopefully, to ask some questions. But one thing I would just ask for you to kind of think about is, if trust is really one of those critical elements of building a collaborative and sustaining a collaborative, what are some of the strategies or tools or techniques or ways in which you as leaders in your own right in these collaboratives have actually taken or observed or witnessed that have really helped advance the conversations that are so critical and the relationships that are so critical to actually reaching on the ground success, which is the point of bringing you all together, right? So I would just ask some food for thought as we go into the break, and then we'll turn it to Jack, and he's going to lead the rest of the group into some engagement with you all. So thank you for your time so far. I will take 20 minutes? All right, 20 minutes. Free to roll.
Position to help us out. Makes me think we really don't need that. We've got so many diverse walks of life helping to make our decisions to guide our county. So it's appreciated what all you do. Thank you. And then we'll go to you right here. If you stand up, say who you are, and if you have a question or comment about the panel.
Twice this has happened to me now. Look in the back row. I'm Denise Rose. I'm with Harney County Economic Development.
And do you have any comments for the panel?
I I'm here to hear all about the collaborative efforts. That is what really resonates with me, and I'm hearing some great stuff. Thank you.
Okay, Robert?
Jack, could you speak up?
Usually you say I'm too loud.
Yeah, can you just put a little more whine in your voice?
So I'm Robert. I'm the summer technician for the HDP, and I've only been here for about 2 weeks. I'm seasonal, and it's really cool to see that this county has this sort of collaboration among agriculture, among NGOs and the federal government, and yeah, it's really cool to see all these projects going on and everyone's working together to solve some complex issues.
Great.
I am Teresa Wicks. I'm the Eastern Oregon Field Coordinator for Portland Audubon, and I'm mostly here just to learn about the collaborative efforts that are being done in the basin. But one of the things that I thought about while I was listening to everybody talk is how the indigenous perspective has been represented in these collaboratives. So mostly wondering if the tribe is part of any of these collaboratives that are represented here today. Yes.
So Cal, would you stand up and touch on that?
Yeah, so I'm...
Well, if you'd stand up, that'd be great.
I'm Calla Hagel. I work for the Burns Paiute Tribe, wildlife biologist there. And we are technical representatives at several of these collaboratives. And we hope to continue to be, and maybe we'll expand into other ones as the need arises.
Thanks, Teresa. Let's go over here. Shane?
Shane Thiel, I'm the Burns Interagency Fire Zone Fire Management Officer. I was involved with the Refuge Collaborative, but I'm on the Wildfire Collaborative. And for me, it was good to see the other collaborative groups, meet a few other people, and good to see all the good work you folks are doing in Harney County.
I'm Casey O'Connor, and I'm also with Burns Interagency Fire Zone.
The really hard cases, and one of the things that Dan told me was that you put in effort at the front end for a much more durable, better solution in the long run, and that's, and I think it's we're brand new. I mean, this collaborative movement, this way of doing things has been going on, you know, for a chunk of years, 10, 15 years, but you know, I think in a lot of places we're still at that place where we're getting enough trust that we're going to start to see the really accelerated results. And I think it's going to be that is going to be one of the things that's going to be necessary for funders to help environmental groups to have enough money to do that 275-mile drive. Because there's not very many of us who have the funding, and there's not that many groups who are persuaded that the results are worth it.
Question? Right here.
My name is Tamara Carl, and I'm the community health worker at Cemetery Care. And I came today just to learn more about what's going on in the community. I want to be more involved in what, you know, my community personally and as my job. I do have a question for the youth collaboration. Redoing the skate park does a good job. And I know kids sometimes have a really hard time keeping focus, as adults have a hard time keeping focus. But do you have other things that you're working on besides just the skate park, or other goals that you have for when the skate park is finished to help engage these kids and keep them as part of the coalition?
I think what we learned in the process is that we probably ought to ask the kids. And that's been a real learning for so many of the adults in the initiative, that we didn't know really how to react, that they just took off on their own. But I have to say I was really proud of all the other adults, that we realized we needed to let them go to keep their enthusiasm and keep their momentum with a little bit of structure in place at the same time. So I think that we need to just collaborate about that, just like anything else, and start raising those questions early on about their ideas for post-skate park. But I don't have any doubt there's a lack of enthusiasm or commitment from them to follow through.
And Dan, I'll just add one thing. One of the challenges is these kids grow up and they graduate from high school and they leave. And so to keep other kids involved that are younger, that are coming up behind the ones that are there now, I think it's going to be important for sustaining that and keeping it going as well.
Ken?
Couple of questions to ex-elected official or elected official.
there's, what, 7,500 people in the county. It's probably the 10th largest county in the US. And each one of these initiatives is trying to accomplish significant outcomes. How do you encourage investment in a community where you have limited population and, you know, people who are showing up at meetings at ungodly times and for long durations, limited population, and then how do you acquire funds to do the implementation that's going to be critical to the measurable outcomes of these collaborative efforts?
I'll lead for Dan. So the one thing I can say is a lot of these, except for the youth, deal with natural resource and public land issues. So as you know, 74% of our county's public land. Public lands are one of our country's greatest assets. I think we're all trying to be better stewards of those lands, but we want the public engaged. So just because there's 7,400 people in our constituent base, we have a broad selection of people that want to come in here and enjoy what we're trying to protect and steward. So I think that gives us a unique opportunity to go to private funders, state or federal, and ask for capacity and funds in order to protect that treasure that we all cherish, public lands.
Louis?
I'm Louis Smith, part of the RFPA Fire Bureau. Been to a lot of different collaboratives. I went nature walks with the Forest Collaborative and stuff like that. I've seen a lot of positive stuff, learned a lot of stuff, different things. Seen the buffalo situation, you know, and I understood that real well. It was like, when he said that, it was like great, because it just tickled me, because that happens a lot in a lot of places when people don't know the other person is there. You know, oh, there's a stranger. What's he wanting to do? He wants to change my thing. I was born and raised in this county, growing on. I've traveled all around the world. I've seen a lot of different things. I really do believe that your resources as those kids are probably the biggest resource out of the whole thing. Because if we can't get them kids to come back here to become professional people, to be biologists or fish, you know, whatever, to help they'll come back and lock in. You know, we have a lot of professional people come in, but they want to travel back out. They're gone 5 years from now. And it's like, I like the ones that stay here forever, you know. They're the ones that we need to try and focus on. And that's why I like hearing that. So, I don't know. There's a lot of good things going on, a lot of things that kind of confuse me. Thank you.
Thanks, Louis. Louis is the reason we have a Forest Health Collaborative. We used to have big trees. Louis is the one that cut them all down.
There's a lot of stones.
My name is Carlton Stroud, and I'm a park biologist with the Heinz RCS here and the SWCD. And for me, this is great just to start meeting some of the faces behind the names and stuff. I've only been on the job for about 2 months here, so this is a good time to start building some of these relationships and also to kind of know the background information for some of these collaboratives. So I keep seeing these names bounce around and stuff and titles, so it's just great to know some of the background information.
I'm Ed Contreras, Sonic Coordinator with the Intermountain West Joint Venture. I work with Carlton, assisting the NRCS field office deliver habitat projects on wet meadows. And so, working with Intermountain West Joint Venture, you know, our program is a voluntary, proactive approach, and you know, I'm located in Klamath Falls, so I don't really consider myself part of this community. Shoot, I just moved to Oregon, so I don't feel like I'm a part of any community at this point. So I'm really impressed with, you know, communities that come together. I really admire that. But being, you know, an outsider and working in this area, you know, I think for me and for other organizations that work, you know, outside of where they live, you know, or individuals that work outside of where they live, you know, they care about the people here and they want to empower the people here to succeed. You know, I'm not here to do things, you know, to help this community succeed for myself, but for the people that are here. And so, as an outsider, bringing in, you know, these outside ideas and influences, my question for you guys that live here is, how do you balance, you know, these outside influences, these outside perspectives, and how, you know, how do you, and with other people in your community that might question, you know, why are you working with these folks that are bringing these outside influences? How do you, you know, what do you tell them in trying to protect kind of your community identity, you know, if that makes sense?
Gary, why don't you take that?
Thanks, Jack. So that's one of the early things that we learned in formative years of Idaho Partnership is that some people talk in terms of community, of their neighborhood, or their town, or their county, and the thing that we discovered early on is that community to us was the state or the region or anybody that was interested in the outcome of a specific issue. And so I'm glad you got calling me because I was going to, and I didn't know you had a question, but I was going to answer your comment to tell you that you know, we don't consider other folks just because they don't live here as being outside. They're all part of the community.
My name's Jerry Rank, and I'm with the Rangeland Fire Protection and also the Wildfire Collaborative. A couple things I've learned that pertain to the collaboratives. When I was young, I owned my own business for a lot of years, and I learned to always surround myself with people smarter than me to be successful. That's what these collaboratives do. And the second thing, something I used to drill in when I was on the board for the Watershed Council, is always bring your enemies to the table to negotiate. You're never going to make a good decision until you do. Any decision you make will fail until you bring your enemies to the table with you. And these collaboratives are doing that, and I think it's awesome.
Great comment.
So my name is Greg Smith. I'm the county's economic development director. I get the pleasure of working with Denise, which is awesome. I don't have anything really to say except for congratulations. I work with a lot of different entities, and this is the first time I've ever seen anything like this, where everyone's coming together to discuss what's in the best need of the county and the region and of Eastern Oregon. It says a lot for our county commissioners and their leadership. It says a lot for each of you. So congratulations, and please know your economic development office is open to you and to everyone who want to be a partner. Thank you.
I'm John Thielen, and I'm on the Watershed Council and the Rangeland Fire Group. And I'm really impressed with the work of developing this collaborative and their efforts to educate the general populace. I think there's a growing need for awareness that our resources are limited and that they're overdrawn. That's been published, but I hope that we could find a way to cut back on, or to conserve better until we're past a crisis. I mean, it's a crisis in the world and in the country because there's more people than there's ever been in the world before. And most of the things that I've read is the most efficient thing that you can do is conserve. So I would just share that.
Sue? And Sue, you are being filmed. I just want to make it.
Oh, boy, that's a busman's holiday. When I first came here in 1991, and Jack was one of the first people I met, I think, back in the day, and a few others, and I was an early young green filmmaker, and I wanted to make a story about people who were finding ways to collaborate across the lines on some of these issues. And because I was so young, and not young, but I was, let's say, just starting out, that's more accurate,
that project didn't finish, but I find myself here still and even so much more recharged in the last couple of years. And I just want to thank everybody who's braved the camera, and there are more of you to come. As my husband Richard Wilhelm and I try to finish our project here, so impressed, and I learned a whole bunch today, and I really thank everybody. There's been so much commitment of time and energy and heart and spirit and soul from all of you guys and everybody in the community, so thanks so much. That's my feeling about it. Thanks.
I'm Diane Rappaport, and although I work on the Hines Council and I work with the community water planning, I came here today partly because I didn't know what some of these initiatives were all about. I didn't really know how deeply invested in the community housing partnership was either. I didn't really know what they did. I mean, I kind of knew, but I kind of didn't. And I kind of knew what one's initiative was. But I also teach Tai Chi, and I teach Qigong. And I teach it because the one thing that breaks down resistance, the one thing that breaks down divisiveness, the one thing that helps people be willing to accept change and to go forward is learning how to relax, learning how to let go of control. And these are the things that get in the way. When people are divisive, when people take a position, they get uptight. They get really uptight, internally uptight. And so I wanted to, because I teach techniques for relaxation, I also wanted to ask you all about some of the ways you deal with extreme confrontation. I know you all have stories about, yeah, you talk to each other, but stories, extreme examples of how you dealt with confrontation and extreme divisiveness and tightness, and we do have it to some extent in this community, and all of you up there have worked through a lot of it because you can't work collaboratively unless you can work through it. I mean, I play team sports, so I know how to be on a team, but
Let's hear from Esther. We haven't heard from you yet. You've been in some contentious situations.
It's a good question. I think that a lot of times when conflict like that happens, is what I do is step back from it and take a little bit of time away from it to just try and think through why that conflict is there, and then come back to it and readdress it again, but not in that moment. I mean, this isn't a conflict thing, but I think my work, here would be early on. I called Dan up one day and I just said, I want to job shadow with you for a day. I just want to see what your world is like. And so we spent an entire day together. And it was just, kind of that thing of like, okay, what? So I was just getting a sense of those kind of things. And I think at the end of the day, we looked at each other and went, on a good day, 50% of the time we probably agree. There's 15% that we might be able to influence each other, and the rest we're probably never going to agree. But there's times now in those disagreements that we understand each other's point of view, that I'm not back down and just kind of give it, And then there's times that we just kind of go, okay, there's either times where we know we're not going to agree, or sometimes we have actually, but then we just kind of go, okay, we were in that zone now. Remember that sometimes we've been in that 50%.
Anyway, Pam.
I love that you brought up that you teach Tai Chi, because in my other life outside of this, I teach yoga. So that was great. When I get in those really extreme conflicts and I really don't know what to do, I do what we all do here, and that is I collaborate. And I talk to people that can see the situation from a different perspective. And I try really hard to listen for ideas that I haven't heard before. And because sometimes I've had situations where there's somebody that just whatever happens, we just miss each other. We can't see it. We cannot see each other. And I've had to ask for help. And that's what we're good at.
Good question. Thank you for bringing that up. Go ahead.
I was hoping it'd be 4:30. Anyway, my name is Lynn McClintock, and I chose to be elected to the High Desert Park and Rec last year. And so now I
appreciate the efforts that I heard today on the stage and in this meeting. And I hope to take back to our board that I may be an outsider because I chose to retire here, but I want to work with them to bring together, to make our Park and Rec a viable part of our community and for the youth. And I would like to get involved in the youth initiative.
Great comment, thank you.
My name is Tara Thistle, I'm with the BLM. My question is, it seems like even though a lot of us here are already stakeholders and are involved in one or more of these groups, it seems like there could be a little bit of an educational component with the rest of the community that's not really involved in these, or just the general public who lives in town and works at the store. I'm just wondering if any of the groups have any plans in place or thoughts about sharing some of who you are and what you do with the rest of the community.
Huh, is there an extension agent in the house?
By the way, apparently I was loud earlier. One of the things to say build trust, build relationships. I was talking to Autumn. You never wonder what's on Autumn's mind. She's like, dude, you were pretty loud. So I appreciate that. You know, that stuff doesn't happen unless you have somebody paying attention to it. That's the one thing I have to say about that. So you almost have to build that in and find that capacity to have somebody like Melissa paying attention to that, or it doesn't happen. You're busy, engaged in a collaborative, doing your thing, collecting the information, getting the relevant science. You're busy doing that stuff, and what falls off the table is that outreach component. And so you have to have somebody that's paying attention to it, or create a committee or something. We've been successful doing that as well, but somebody has to pay attention to it.
Melissa, what would you add? Please stand up.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's tough because not everybody, I don't know, collaborations, it's, it's tough. It is a tough process to go through. A lot of you guys were talking about earlier how it takes a lot of time. And so like a lot of people, like even in the process, fall off the bandwagon like while you're going along there. And in a sense, I feel like in some ways, like that has happened in the community, and there's like squeaky wheels that fall off, send out like a bad PR message to everybody else, because they're a lot louder. I would just say, it's like events like this and sharing all these stories that are really gonna get it out there, and also, just having all the partners a lot more involved in telling the story to their friends, so that it's just spreading through kind of like an osmosis.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, I would say a couple of things. One, I think that's the hardest part, and I said earlier, I think one of the big challenges is how do you reach beyond the circle that you created. You have the folks that want to be involved for whatever reason, they have that incentive, it's important enough to them. So I said earlier, to be there, and how do you get to the next concentric circle out and the one after that? I think that's really the challenge for making at least some of these sustainable over time. We were able to turn some of the OWEB funding that we got and get some match so that we were able to hire full-time staff for Teresa's in the back of the room and put her out here year-round. And a big part of her job is going to be doing that outreach. That's what that funding is for. And to look for opportunities to do things, get people out in the field to see the work, get people engaged in things like community science, volunteer parties, trying to do some collaboration from the east side and the west side of the Cascades, get people working together and try to build that, urban-rural, more understanding across the urban-rural divide as well, sort of expand out what's been going on. The odd couple comment earlier, get more people working together and talking together and collaborating. So, but I think we're all looking for ideas and opportunities for where to do that. So I think, that's one thing that I hope comes back from a meeting like this is if there are events and opportunities and ideas, we need to hear those as well. Because I think sometimes we struggle to figure out where those connection points are.
good.
I think that's really important. The other thing I think too is, and, oh, by the way, great question. But I think sometimes we look for the big win for the message. And I think a lot of times it's a little win all the time. That, or even just not even a win, just the message. And we've tried that with the BLM for a few years. I want folks to know Tara's the one that authors those articles you read every week in the paper. And most of those are pretty benign things that seem pretty simple, but it's just daily business, and it doesn't always have to be a big flashy web page. By the way, Melissa, the web page you built was really nice. Everybody should visit that. But it also implies that there's lots of different things to do. It's not just one thing that's going to get the message. It has to be lots of different things.
Thanks.
Andy DeCrew with the BLM. So this morning I briefly mentioned the Adventure Harney Collaborative that I'm involved in. I didn't mention it again because I didn't come here to talk in that capacity, but so we're a small collaborative. It's kind of early-ish. So we've 2 to 3 years, but we're not big and sophisticated as some of your guys' collaboratives. So it was kind of comforting for me to hear that like Chad and the CCP, and I spent 2 to 3 years just making sure you had the right people there. So it was kind of comforting to hear that success doesn't happen overnight. What are some ideas or some advice from you guys on when people start to lose enthusiasm, when things feel like they're kind of slowing down? How do you maintain that?
Gary.
That'll happen. But if there's 1 or 2, preferably 2, and possibly 3 key people that are really passionate about making sure that it continues and that it keeps making progress at whatever pace. And you've got an idea of where this is going to go, where it's going to end up. You've got that solidly in your minds. Then there'll be other people that you'll be able to involve in it, because you'll keep talking about it, and you'll revive that energy, and then maybe those second generation people coming into it are going to add to the organization what it takes to really kick it off and get it going.
Hey, Jack.
Yeah.
One thing on that, and then also on just developing relationships, is I think it's really beneficial to do field trips and barbecues and different things like that, instead of just always sitting around the table in the classroom or the basement of the courthouse. Let's go out. Change that up. And so, change it up a little bit, get people kind of
Good point.
I'm Rhonda Carges. I work for the Bureau of Land Management. I'm a field manager, and the staff and I, we manage the south half of the Burns District, which is the Steens Mountain, the Pueblos, and the Trout Creeks. Brenda, I think, asked some question about being on the different collaboratives, and unfortunately I have to tell on myself because Peter Harkema and Lord Zaki overheard one of my comments that I made to Mandy and said, believe it or not, I'm on all of your collaboratives and you don't know it. Because, for some of you that don't know, Chad is my husband, so I have lived with the whole initial concept of the High Desert Partnership after we moved here in 2000. I've been with him, I'd like to think, almost every step of the way. So I understand the process. I'm not going to say, I understand the concept. I can't say that I would be really good at trying to start my own collaborative. I think it takes really skilled people, and like you've all talked about, bringing people together that might be polarized at the time. But so I congratulate you all on that. I will say too, I am on the Wildfire Collaborative, and I go to a lot of meetings, but I truly enjoy going to the Wildfire Collaborative. I've made some great connections with people. He's not here, I can't tell on him, but John Anderson, he's at RPA down in Andrews. one of the first meetings, we didn't get along very well. But I think because we'd already started building that trust, John called me on the phone the next day and said, you know what, Ron, I'm really sorry. And we're like the best of friends. I think John's great. I know I have other points. Oh, the Wildfire Collaborative. I do really enjoy going to those meetings. And at the end of the day, it might seem really small, but at the end of the day, we've always accomplished something. Again, it might be small. Sometimes we've accomplished really big, great things, but it's rewarding to go and have an outcome at the end. And I'm sorry I don't have any questions for you because Chad keeps me well informed.
I'm Carter Crouch. I'm a wildlife biologist with the tribe and still fairly new, so I guess I'm still kind of an outsider, but from an outsider's perspective looking in, it's pretty impressive what you guys are doing, especially for such a small community to have everyone here. And from way outside town, making the long drive, just keep up the good work, I guess. No questions.
Yeah, so I'm Calla Hankel, also work for the Burns County Tribe as a wildlife biologist. I think there's so much to be proud of in this room, to remember that we're people, and although we may have differences of opinion, at the end of the day, we're all working towards something greater than ourselves. I guess my one question would be, and this is kind of more just a query, would be that often you'll have participants enter the process maybe 2 to 3 years down the road. Do you have any insights about how to not necessarily label it as a backslide, but to keep that process moving forward while integrating new perspectives?
Pat, would you like to take that? Have you had late arrivals in yours?
We have had late arrivals. Keep in mind that we're among the youngest collaboratives, but it can be an issue. And it's one of the things that you weigh in terms of transparency, making sure that everyone is able to participate, and we're going to have to catch them up now. And so it is something that sometimes we struggle with, but the bottom line is that we welcome participation, and people who come to our meetings realize that there's going to be an expectation of work, and they choose to come back or not. But it's really important for us to make sure that they feel heard and included.
Bruce?
Yeah, I would just add, the collaboratives I've been involved with had professional facilitation, and it is really helpful in those kind of cases. When you have somebody whose job it is to be tracking, what's the dynamic of the meeting, what's the dynamic of the group, we can see we have to do some work here. And I think most of the collaboratives I've been involved with, it's not just the facilitator, there's usually a small core group that sets the agenda, that talks with the facilitator beforehand, a small group that's clued into the dynamics of the big one here. And I think that's really an important part of making the process work for all the rest of us there. It keeps that wheel turning, but allows people to get integrated in a thoughtful way if the facilitators are doing a good job.
I'm Chris Colson, Ducks Unlimited, and whenever I kind of have a collective group of leadership victims on a public stage, I like to pose this to them. You know, when we see collaboratives, and I think the Harney Basin, what's going on here is a great example. We talk about, lots was mentioned about leading up to what I'm getting ready to say. You know, Pat, you made mention of just how straining and hard you have to work at a collaborative. Bruce made mention of sometimes they just seem chronic, they just go on forever. Bob started talking about succession, and then we started talking about trust, how it may take a couple of years for somebody to get trust. And then we talked about how if things are going well, things start to accelerate and lots of opportunity starts to come. And then I think, Pat, you also had mentioned that people drop off and all of a sudden it's this core group of people. And so what I think, you know, I've seen this happen in other places, but certainly here, as Brenda made that exercise of everyone raising their hands and all of the overlap, I mean, I think each day that goes on, an individual becomes more and more valuable in any respective collaboration. because they have a background, they've developed their trust, and they're inherently involved with things that are going on, that are hitting the ground, that are being developed. And I think it's a big issue. I don't know how many times I've been like, oh, I can't believe I'm doing emails at midnight, and other emails start popping in. Oh man, I'm doing it. I'm not sure Brenda's not a vampire. So I guess what I'm posing to you guys is, I think there needs to be, I really do think there needs to be thought given to how do you steward these individuals that are working within a collaborative to not burn out. Because when one of them falls out, it's more than just backfilling and replacing. It's not, you know, an organization can't just bring in a new representative. I mean, I look at some of the landowners who continually come and do this and then still have to go back and do their daily jobs and then still find time for their families. I mean, to me, I just think this needs to start to be more of a conversation, particularly here as all these collaboratives swell and overlap and dovetail. And I really see a lot of the same people just taking on more and more because we've become emotionally and personally invested in it, and you're not going to let it go. And if you do finally say you've had too much and you walk, it's a huge hole. It's a huge gap to fill. And I guess I just like to hear the leadership's perspective on addressing that. And I don't want to hear, I don't mean to sound mean, but I don't want to hear about more money, more capacity. That's just a perpetual tail chase. So I'd like to hear. I'll also add one more thing that I've never, when I've ever done this, I've never heard any compelling answers. So I don't expect what if I hear one? Take this
Jim?
Go ahead, Jim. So the only way you learn things, especially with collaborative stuff, is to ask. And so when people leave, you have to ask them why. And so, you know, either a one-on-one with the group or the leader of the group or an exit interview. So you can understand if it was, you know, strictly not related to that group's performance or interaction, you know, personal problem with the family or job thing. So there's not much you can do about that. But if it has something to do with how your forms or not, you need to learn those things and either promise that person to correct them, please come back, or say, yeah, we'll learn from this and it'll help you keep future people.
You know, if you stand up.
Sure. You know, Chris, I've been a part of some collaboratives outside of Harney County, and some of those have been effective, some have been really ineffective. I think some of it, part of the answer might be a little bit Darwinian, in that if they're not effective, people are going to peel off and drop out quicker. If they're effective and you're seeing outcomes, that's going to keep a critical mass engaged. So